We are back. My name is still Brady Pelton, and I really enjoyed the chocolate break, and I hope you all did as well. Let's take an opportunity and thank all of our WBPC sponsors right now with a round of applause. The next discussion is timely. The availability of affordable, reliable power is becoming an issue across the country, and we have specific concerns about the power supply in the Bakken region. NDPC has put together a power supply task force. We have put together the leaders of the power generation and supply companies, and we have North Dakota's leading expert on this topic leading the discussion this afternoon. I invite the panelists at this time to join us on the stage. And I'll make introductions now. Serving as our session chair is Public Service Commissioner Julie Fedorchak. She has served on the commission since 2013. She heads the pipeline, electric transmission and energy conversion siting, gas economic regulation, railroad safety and regulation portfolios, and is the state's liaison to the Midwest Independent System Operator. Julie is currently the president of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. By the way, Julie is also running to become the first woman to represent North Dakota in the U.S. House of Representatives. That's right. And here's an opportunity for you all. If you want to meet her in person, she's having an event tonight over at the Broadway Grill from 5:30 to 7 p.m. Joining Julie on the panel this afternoon is Todd Brickhouse, who serves as the Chief Executive Officer and General Manager for Basin Electric Power Co-op. He joined Basin Electric in 2022 as its Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. Brickhouse leads a team of nearly 1,800 employees who work to provide value to the cooperative's membership by providing affordable and reliable power, products, and services produced in a safe and environmentally responsible manner. Basin Electric's service territory includes 3 million consumers across 9 states in the upper Midwest, Great Plains, and Rocky Mountain regions. Basin Electric's largest subsidiary, Dakota Gasification Company, operates the Great Plains Synfuels plant. Dakota Gasification Company captures and sequesters approximately 2 million metric tons of carbon dioxide annually. Also joining us this afternoon is Nicole Kivisto, who serves as the president and CEO of MDU Resources Group, a member of the S&P MidCap 400 Index that provides essential products and services through its regulated energy delivery and construction services businesses. Prior to her current role, she served as president and CEO of the corporation's utility group that serves 1.2 million electric and natural gas customers in 8 states. Nicole is a Beulah, North Dakota native. Finally on our panel this afternoon is Pierce Norton, who is the president and chief executive officer of ONEOK and is a member of the ONEOK Board of Directors. He has been in his current role since June 2021 and previously served as president and CEO of One Gas, Inc. He currently serves on the American Petroleum Institute Board of Directors. He previously served on the North Dakota Petroleum Council Board of Directors. Julie, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I really look forward to a productive conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Brady. Really appreciate that thorough introductions. And welcome, everybody. It's great to see such a nice crowd for what promises to be an electrifying discussion. I do like puns. Okay, so the name of this panel is The Future Energy Supply, Available, Reliable, and Affordable. And I was talking last night to one of the members of this organization, and he gave me a new title, and that new title was, Where in the Hell is All the Power Gonna Come From? And I think that's kind of the bottom line here, and I think as we talk through this issue today, I think we're all going to be kind of asking that, but also seeing some great opportunities. So this panel is full of folks who understand what's going on and some of the troubling things happening in our country, in our nation, in relation to our power supply, our electricity supply. So this panel is going to shed light on that, and also, I hope, encourage you all, as if you don't have enough to do, encourage you all to get involved in the electricity side of the energy equation. It matters to you both because your industry requires a lot of power to produce power, to produce energy, and you also provide some of the source for the generation. So we really need the oil and gas industry to be fully engaged in this electricity side of the conversation as well. So we'll get to it. So our plan today is we're going to each set the stage a little bit, and then we're going to get into some Q&A. So I'm going to get started with setting the stage. As Brady mentioned, I'm currently president of the National Utility Regulatory Commissioners nationwide, and I sought that role about 4 years ago because serving on the commission for 12 years, I've seen the discussions and been part of the discussions nationwide as it relates to energy and energy supply. And I recognized a few years back that we were missing the point, and I was really concerned about a lot of the direction that the conversation was going and the lack of reality in terms of the need for dispatchable resources, resources like coal, oil, and natural gas. They've been on the chopping block and too aggressively. And so I got involved to try to elevate the importance of two things, reliability and affordability. So that has really been my focus my time as president of NARUC. And I've also been engaged in the MISO market. MISO stands for Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. In North Dakota, that's one of the two regional grid operators that operates our electric system. I've been the state's liaison to MISO for 8 years, and so that organization dictates the policy for the market that drives the electricity sector and really manages the grid, so manages all the resources that get onto the grid. Being involved in MISO has made me concerned about the policy direction that things are going. And so I've watched that and seen, and I want to talk about some of those things. How do I get my slides up here? There we go. Okay, so currently, I think we all can agree that in a country like the United States that has been infinitely blessed with energy resources, we have coal, we've got oil, we've got natural gas, we have wind, solar, hydro, we have nuclear, we have hydrogen that's being developed, biofuels. I don't think there's another country in the world that's been more blessed than the U.S. has as it relates to energy resources. And so there's really no excuse that anyone in the U.S. should ever run short of power, especially electricity. We should never, ever run short. But the case is today that 2/3 of our country is at risk of not having enough supply and electricity supply to meet demand under certain conditions. That's not a forecast, that's today in the U.S. And this first slide that I have up here shows you that map. This comes from NERC, which stands for the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They are an independent body. They're a subsidiary of FERC, the Energy Regulatory Commission. They are a subsidiary of that, and NERC evaluates the reliability of our U.S. electric grid, and this is their assessment, that today 2/3 of the country is at elevated risk of not having enough power to meet demand. This is the map that shows their 10-year assessment. So looking out 10 years, you can see that everything except for the blue areas is projected to have concerns about having enough power supply to meet demand. So this is because in the U.S., we're basically committing energy suicide. We are taking perfectly good resources and turning them off. The EPA is doing this, states are choosing to do this in the name of decarbonization, and they're turning good, reliable resources that have been the mainstay of our power grid for the last 100 years, and they're retiring them before resources have been proven and reconnected to the grid to replace them. And so this is what happens when you do that. You jeopardize 2/3 of our country with not having enough electricity to meet demand. I contemplated asking Ron if we could have a little exercise here just at the beginning of this panel by shutting all the lights off and sitting here in the dark for a minute so we can understand what it's like to not have power. It would be very disturbing for us just for like 10 seconds to be in this room without power. And yet, our policies in this country are driving us to that kind of a future. And so I've gotten very passionate about this issue. Quite honestly, it's one of the main reasons why I threw my hat in the race for Congress, because we need people in Washington who understand this and can talk some sense into other folks and be convincing on the federal level. So that's kind of the issue that I see at hand today in terms of the baseline for setting the stage here. I will just go one more slide forward. This is 2 weeks ago, the EPA came out with a new greenhouse gas rule that affects the electric industry. I know they've come out with all kinds of different rules affecting oil and gas as well. They're having a heyday in the last few weeks here at the EPA. But 27 states, including North Dakota, have joined the appeal of this rule, the greenhouse gas rule, which will basically require all coal-fired power plants and new gas plants by 2032 to have carbon capture and storage operating, or else they have to shut down. And so if you consider the map that was just on the screen a minute ago, where 2/3 of the country was at elevated risk, and then the second map where 10 years from now we're in a deep concern again, that doesn't even include these rules, which will basically shutter pretty much all of the coal-fired power plants if they can't prove and have operational carbon capture and storage. So these are the concerns that I see on the horizon for the electric power supply industry. It's why I want industries like yours to get active in these grid groups and be part of the conversation. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Todd to go next and kind of set the stage from your perspective.
Thank you very much, Julie. I will start with a human moment, if you don't mind. Bear with me. An hour ago, Basin wrapped up its board meeting for the month, and then I'm on this panel this afternoon, obviously, and then I have dinner with a number of you this evening. Spent a good part of Mother's Day preparing for this week, and today is my 20th wedding anniversary. My wife is out here in the crowd. I'd just like to say I'll make it up to you. Happy anniversary. So thank you. So a couple months ago, Ron Ness did us all a great service. He took the Petroleum Council and made a power supply subcommittee from that group. And what that allows us to do is a group of us to get together periodically and have a discussion about providing reliable and affordable energy. Specifically in the North Dakota, but as I'll touch on in a minute, Basin is actually concerned about a much broader swath of territory in the country. One question that I got at the start of the Power Supply Subcommittee of the Petroleum Council was, what is this cooperative business model? And so I'm not going to do a full cooperative 101, but the slide up here is the cooperative service network in the United States. And we cover about 75% of the counties in the country. And then if you're, the cooperatives on this map are the generation and transmission cooperatives. And so generation and transmission cooperatives are the wholesalers. We provide bulk electricity generation from coal, natural gas, nuclear, renewables, et cetera. And then we are owned by distribution cooperatives. And distribution cooperatives are the last mile of line to our homes and our businesses. So that is how the cooperative business model works. It's somewhat similar to the petroleum industry in that if you're a driller, I'd say that you're a wholesaler, and if you're a pipeline company, I'd say you're a wholesaler, and then the retailer is obviously the gas pumps that we go fill up our cars with, and so that's the retail end of your business and an analogy of how our businesses work in parallel. With respect to basin, this map is a map of our service territory on the left, and then on the right is a diagram of the business model that I just described. So those of you that are doing business in the Bakken, you are served by probably one of six or maybe more than one of six of Basin's members. You've got McKinley Electric Cooperative, Montreal Williams, Burke Divide Electric Cooperative, Rough Rider Electric Cooperative, Slope Electric Cooperative, and Lower Yellowstone Electric Cooperative. So those are six of Basin's 140 members. The map that I showed you on the prior page, there are 895 electric cooperatives in the country. So Basin's 140 members are 16% of the cooperative network in the United States. Basin's retail electric service territory is roughly 500,000 square miles. That is 12% of the United States of America. By geographic service territory, Basin Electric is the largest electric utility in the country. Now let's think about that in the context of North Dakota. North Dakota is the fourth smallest state by population, but we have the third largest oil field in the country. We have a multi-state energy provider in MDU. If you look at United Energy and Rainbow Energy, we have one of the largest independent power producers in the country. And you've got Basin Electric, which is the largest electric utility in the country by geographic service territory. So I would say that the state of North Dakota punches above its weight class. So this is a chart that was in an article in the Wall Street Journal back in November of last year. In addition to the abundance that I just described, we are growing like crazy in North Dakota. From the 10 years from 2013 to 2022, North Dakota's electric consumption increased by 60%. 60%. The next four states that grew most rapidly behind us grew at 20% over that decade. From Basin's forecast, the growth is only going to continue. We think for the next 5 years at least that our unit sales are going to compound at 7% per year. So I think the media has actually done a public service really over the last 6 months talking about what Julie was referencing earlier. The United States is growing rapidly in its electric consumption. And that's a trend that didn't happen really in the past, really since the turn of the century. It's a new trend. And when you look at the media, it's rare that the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post have been on the same side of a story. They've done a remarkable job in the past 6 months covering this issue. Obviously, the growth that we've had in North Dakota has been a function of the oil and gas industry, you all in this audience. It's Basin's proposition, though, and I think you probably heard some of this yesterday, is that the utility industry and the technology industry are on a collision course. And humbly, I'll be the first to admit, We do not know how far those trains are apart and how fast they are traveling towards each other. But we are accelerating on the track. And the reason for that, you can just think of really since the turn of the century. Our electrons in our industry are the raw materials for their products. And think back to the turn of the century. Well, I think Google was 2 or 3 years old. Microsoft was still sending their products to us on CDs. Amazon was just selling books. And Facebook, Meta, what it's called now, didn't even exist. Now their entire business model is concentrated on cloud computing. And the loads are not 5, 10, 50 megawatts. When they come to the service territory, they are looking for 500 and 1,000 megawatts, possibly more. So it's a dramatic acceleration in the growth that we are expecting in the utility industry. So what is Basin doing to keep up with this growth? We've got a capital expenditure program right now of active projects that is about $1.9 billion. If you look over the decade I was referencing from 2013 to 2022, our members, many of whom are represented in this audience, they spent about $1.3 billion building out their systems in North Dakota for the oil and gas industry. Basin spent a similar amount. Over the next 5 years, we expect our capital expenditure program to be about $4 billion, although that's based on last year's financial forecast. We expect that to be closer to $6 billion when we complete our financial forecast for this year in August. So significant growth that we are funding through capital expenditures. And the largest of those is a project called Pioneer Generating Station 4. That's an addition to our existing Pioneer fleet. It's budgeted at $805 million. It's expected to be online in the summer of 2025, and it's located right in the heart of the Bakken in Williston, North Dakota. And it's going to provide just under 600 megawatts of electricity for the people here in this room. And then on the transmission side, we've got 3 major projects that are underway, and the budgeted spend on those is roughly $700 million. Roundup to Tacoma Ridge is only 35 miles of transmission line, but it's vitally important for us to get electrons up into the Bakken. We started on that project, broke ground on it last month. If you drive through the south side of the lake through the Bakken, you probably see the construction we're doing up there. We accelerated the construction schedule on that. Originally, it was scheduled to be in service next spring. We're hoping to get that in service in November of this year. And then Leland Olds to Tandy, that is running south of the lake up to the northeast, and then takes a hard left turn and runs up to the northwest. That's a larger project, 175 miles. It's $417 million budgeted. We are in the easement process of that project, and we also just approved yesterday the acquisition of poles for that. And so that's scheduled to be online in 2026. We keep our fingers crossed. There obviously is a great deal of landowner fatigue where we're trying to do those easements, but we are working closely with the landowners. We've got a good portion of the project under easement, but it's always the last 25% that gives you problems. And then the Tandy and Wheelock up to Saskatchewan, I want to assure all of you the Canadians are not going to be stealing our power. We are going to build out a fleet that will hopefully allow them, when there's lower demand in North Dakota, that we will be able to transmit electrons up north, up to our neighbors in the north. And then likewise, We hope that when they have excess electrons, they'll be able to get them down here and help us with our reliability requirements in North Dakota. With that, Nicole.
Okay, Nicole Kivisto with MD Resource. I really look forward to the conversation today. I just got a few slides to tee it up, kind of who we are, and but thought I would start with just a thank you as I look out on the audience today, and I think about the panel that I'm honored to be beside here. Collectively, what we do really does matter, and we are essential, and that's the conversation about how are we going to get this right. So thank you to everyone in the audience for what you're doing to supply the energy needs for our state and nation. So with that, just a quick introduction of our company. We are celebrating our 100-year anniversary this year, and so quite an accomplishment. I'm honored to be a part of an organization that has really survived the test of time. And so as I think about these huge challenges that face our industry, I know that we can get through them together. We've been through many challenges in the past, and so let's rally together and get through the next 100 years. Just a bit of a backdrop in terms of our utility footprint. We are a regulated utility, unlike the cooperative model that Todd just described. We serve 1.2 million customers across 8 states. On the electric side of our business, which I know is more of what the conversation is about, we serve a 4-state area, 145,000 customers. So when we think about the scale of basin and the megawatts you just described, our owned capacity is 648 megawatts. So as you were describing some of the fleet that you're building, obviously we're on a smaller scale, and just keeping that in perspective as we move forward. We also own a regulated pipeline that is in the heart of the Bakken, and you can see the Bakken footprint here, 2.7 BCF capacity per day on our pipeline. We have the largest storage field in North America, which of course provides benefits for our gas LDC customers in terms of access to lower cost of gas. And our pipeline business does transport 82% of the gas from Montana, Dakota's LDC customers. When we think about our jobs every day, I guess the one thing as I thought about this panel that I wanted to make sure I introduced before we got into the Q&A is really it is a balancing act. Every day we are making decisions in terms of balancing all of the words on this slide: safety, reliability, the environment, affordability for our customers, and sustainability for the next 100 years. We aren't in the position where we have the luxury to pick one of those over the others. So as I started this conversation about we are essential, that means reliability matters. That means affordability matters. We have to have access to our electric and gas customers regardless of financial wherewithal. And so we're balancing these conversations on a daily basis, and we're trying to do that as we're dealing with regulation, as Julie just described. And so it is a balancing act. I look forward to continuing the conversation here as we move forward. As we think about that balancing act, though, Julie mentioned early on her involvement in MISO, MDU's territory, and we are part of that MISO footprint. And so what I would say about that is what that provides for our customers is cost share on transmission. So the benefit to our customers is a lower cost of transmission. We're sharing in that across the entire MISO region. You can see that region here. We also have a resource adequacy that's really shared across the MISO footprint. So those are the positives from our customers' perspectives. But what that means is we are also influenced or impacted by decisions that others make within the MISO region. So without getting into an RTO discussion and getting way into the weeds, what you should know is that when we think about this MISO region, 21 utilities within that region have clean energy goals greater than 80%. 3 states within the MISO footprint have clean energy goals at 100%. 2 states have 100% clean energy law. And so as we think about the transformation of the electric fleet across the MISO footprint, that does have impact. And Julie, I think you teed it up well with, what does that mean then? And some of those decisions are causing NERC, MRO, and others to talk about this risk of reliability as we move forward. So look forward to the discussion today, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Pierce, for your introduction.
So honored to be here on this panel today. Thank you all for having me here today. I personally believe that if you want to live a fulfilled life, that you need to do something every day that makes a difference in other people's lives. So I want to just echo what Nicole said, which is you wouldn't be here today unless you had some part to play in what North Dakota does in the oil and gas business or the electric generation business. That is meaningful. On this slide, I've got this in two parts. One is more of a look at the United States. If you would have looked at this same map back in 2000, almost every line on this map would not have been there. So all of this progress has been made because of the shale plays primarily in the North Dakota area. And if you take away anything from this, this talk today, you can walk out of here with your head held high that North Dakota is making a difference everywhere in the United States because we are primarily a net exporter of natural gas and the products that come along with that. So that's very important to us. What we do at ONEOK is we basically move molecules. The molecules that are produced here in the state of North Dakota primarily are not consumed here, so you've got to move them out to where they can be used somewhere else. So that's basically what we do. We gather gas, we process gas, we treat gas, and then the liquids that come off of those gas plants, whether or not they're ours or somebody else's, we transport those literally all the way from North Dakota down through the mid-continent and all the way to the Gulf Coast. If you'd have told me 20 years ago that, could you foresee massive amounts of production, literally, 400,000 or 500,000 barrels a day coming out of the Bakken going all the way down to the Gulf Coast of Texas, I'd say there's probably no way that would happen. But that's exactly what's happening today. So the other thing I would say is that, and this kind of goes to something that Julie said earlier, we hear the word transition a lot in this country. We're going to transition away from the energy sources that we have, whether or not that's coal or anything else or natural gas, and we're going to go to something else. Well, I'm from Alabama, so I actually looked that up in the dictionary. What does transition mean? It means that you're actually going to go from one thing to another, and you're probably never going to go back. Well, I want to give you a stat. Most people don't realize that the amount of wood, we have a kind of a technical term for it now. We call it traditional biomass. We don't want to call it wood anymore. So traditional biomass today in the world is the same consumption level as it was over 200 years ago. It's the same. So our concept is more that we're going to have energy addition and transformation. You used the word transformation, Nicole. I think that's an important word because what you can see is we first had wood, then we had coal, then we had natural gas, then we had nuclear, then we had the renewables, wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, and nuclear. So they all build on top of one another, and the reason is because two things. One is the population is growing worldwide. Around 8 billion people today, going to somewhere around 9.8, maybe 10 billion in the future. So that just population growth itself is going to require more energy. And the second thing is it's about basically the energy security and what comes along with that, which is basically your quality of living. The United Nations calls this the HDI index, the Human Development Index. And so as societies progress, they actually consume more energy per capita. So not only is the population going to grow, but this concept of having a better life for people that don't live like us in the United States is real. So it's going to be more energy, and North Dakota, in my opinion, plays a big role in that. A couple of things about North Dakota. We have a corporate office in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but I can tell you there's a lot of magic that happens here in North Dakota for ONEOK, and it's something that's very important, to our systems. I want to brag on our own employees. That's part of the reason that we are so successful up here is because they know how to operate in the conditions that we live in this area. So it's very, very important. And the other thing that I would say is that the projects that we've done here, we talked about being integrated and reliable. We have intentionally not only put processing plants in on our gathering systems, but we've configured those so that if one goes down, we can basically move that gas somewhere else so that you don't have to shut in the natural gas, thus shutting in the oil production. So that flexibility and that integration actually brings a lot of reliability to our systems. And then we have more capacity. We have 1.9 billion cubic feet a day of processing capacity up here. Currently, we're moving about 1.6 billion through our assets. And then we also have capacity on the NGL lines, the raw feed lines that go from basically here to the Gulf Coast. We're putting in more pumps right now in that system. By first quarter 2025, we're going to have that line fully powered and have, you know, another 100,000 barrels a day of capacity that we're going to be able to move through our system up here. So all of those things, you know, point to how important not only North Dakota is to ONEOK, but also how important North Dakota is to the entire United States.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you. So we wanted to spend just a minute or two or 20 highlighting, just setting the stage so everyone here can get an appreciation from Basin, how far their territory is, how many states are in, same with MDU, and the variety that they're in, electric and gas. And then for ONEOK, just the breadth of their involvement both here and across the country. So this is really not just a North Dakota discussion. This is much broader than that, much more regionally and nationally. So we'll start with an easy question. This came up a lot when a few years back, you might remember the winter storm Uri in Texas, where the entire Texas grid was about 45 minutes from collapsing entirely. And there was major damage to that entire state, costing hundreds of billions of dollars because of the lack of available electricity and the shortages there. And it raised this question, and I think it's a question that's still talked a lot about today, and that is, who is responsible for the reliability of the grid? And so I want my esteemed panelists here to weigh in on that, and we can talk just for a couple minutes about that question before we get into some of the other ones. Whoever wants to jump in, who do you think it is? Or would
I'll tell you what,
Well,
I'm going to jump in, but the problem with this question is I was with a utility in the state of Oklahoma, so I was at ground zero of Winter Storm Uri. So I think we have 57 minutes left. I could talk about this for 50, but I'll try to make this brief. So I heard a quote the other day that I thought was, you know, very, you know, thoughtful, which was, a simple answer to a complex question is false optimism. So think about that. A simple question, you know, to a complex issue is false optimism. So as I think through who is responsible, you know, for the reliability of the power grid, it's easy as a country to say that, well, the power went off, you know, the gas went off. Well, it's the utility's fault, but it's much larger than that. It goes back to the producers working with the gas gatherers, working with the gas transmission, working with the storage owners, working with even, you know, the state and local government officials, because Julia alluded to this just a few minutes ago, which is, you know, you can do things, you know, from a regulatory agency standpoint that picks winners and losers and puts us in a very precarious situation as it relates, you know, to unintended consequences. So it's widespread as to who's responsible for this, but I think the answer to that is that we have to get together. You alluded to this too, and that's the one thing I'd like to compliment North Dakota on, and Ron Ness, is we have up here tried to do that. We tried to bring the stakeholders together and listen to one another, understand the issues from every angle, and then let's work to solving the problem. Let's don't pick sides. Let's pick the issue. Let's decide, you know, what is the problem we're trying to solve, And then by doing that, you know, I think we can get to the answer, and we don't have to point fingers as to, because the time to fix this problem is before it becomes a problem.
Anybody else have more to add?
Yeah, I think you said it well, Pierce. I mean, my original answer, Julie, when everyone was kind of looking at who's going to respond here, mine was going to be we all are. And so we as a utility own a piece of that. We have to work with MISO to own a piece of that. We have to work with our regulators to own a piece of that. We have to work with our state officials, our federal officials. To your point, Pierce, it's not a slam dunk answer, but we also have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what are we doing to be at the table in these conversations? And so as a utility provider, we certainly do own a piece of the reliability. And as I mentioned earlier, that is something we look at every day in terms of balancing those decisions that we make. So, but we all are would have been the shorter answer.
Todd, anything more to add?
We all are. And I'll expand on it a little bit. I've worked in a number of RTOs over the course of my career. Started in Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware, where our entire footprint was in PJM, and then moved to Basin, and now we're in SPP and MISO. And
I want to interject one thing.
Okay.
RTO means Regional Transmission
Thank you.
Operator.
Right.
That's the grid operators.
that was Julie's first slide where she showed the various RTOs in the country. And so I do think that the RTOs have confused that question a little bit because when we have, whether it's large generation projects, large transmission projects, or our members have large load interconnects, we're going to the RTO. And they are scheduling that, reviewing that, to some extent telling us what can and can't get built. And you do have a situation, which I think you run into as a public service commissioner, where it's RTOs and utilities to some extent going like that and going it's their responsibility. But I think, yes, at the end of the day, who is going to be called onto the carpet when the lights flicker in North Dakota? You're going to be inviting us down to visit you at your offices.
Well, and in Texas, it was, I look at who loses their jobs when the lights go out or when the power isn't there. And in Texas, it was ERCOT, the grid operator, and it was all the regulators. That was pretty much it. I mean, maybe there was some changing of leadership in some of the companies too, but that's who was responsible or held responsible for that. But I think that I agree with you that the regional grid operators have made it a bit more complicated. It's not quite as clear as just the utility and the regulator or the utility and its board as it used to be. And so I've concluded that my focus as a regulator is working with the grid operator to make sure that they're laying out the right expectations for all of the members so that everyone's accountable for bringing the supply that's needed to the grid that's going to be reliable and having the right accountability and in place from that standpoint. And then they can decide what those resources are, and just as long as they have enough of them and they work when they're needed, and there's penalties if they don't, then I think that you've got a system that would function reliably, but we're not there yet. We haven't gotten to all those requirements. Okay, let's switch just a little bit away from some of the dire things and into some more optimistic things. Pierce, I loved how you did that at the beginning, talking about the hope, because I think a state like North Dakota that is flush with energy resources, we do have great opportunities to supply a very hungry nation for power and energy. Can you talk a little bit, Pierce, about the role that you see natural gas playing to fill the demand for more power? And then also, you both, Nicole and Todd, can chime in too. And then also, what do we need to fully realize that kind of future in terms of infrastructure to support that?
Okay. Well, I'm not just saying this because I'm in the natural gas business, but I truly do believe that natural gas is going to play an absolutely critical role And it's because of what I just talked about before, because the energy demand is going to grow. If you look back for the last 20 years, and you look at basically, not necessarily by area, but if you look at just across the United States, and you look at how many quads of energy were actually produced on the electric generation side, it's pretty much been flat. It can go up and down just a little bit, you know, based on where you are, but it's pretty much been flat. But I think the game changer here is going to be something that we're all talking about. It's talked about in every conference that I go to across the United States about the AI generation data centers and the amount of energy consumption there. So as production continues to grow in North Dakota, that means that you're going to have more compression to get the gas from a low pressure to a high pressure. Typically, we like to put in electric compression for that. And then you got the processing plants. You also had to have compression and electricity for those. So there's going to be need to be more of those. You got to have more compression to get it out of here, which is going to be the pipelines. This is a good time to say that the data centers and consumption and the power plants that Basin is building up here is really a good thing to try to consume as much gas as we can, 24 hours around the clock, so that you don't necessarily have to build these large pipelines out of this area, because that's just adding more cost, which ends up filtering back basically to the wellhead and ends up filtering into taxes for North Dakota. So I would encourage us all to do everything we can to consume as much as we can up here. And I think data centers are going to be that possibility. But at the end of the day, we're going to need it all. We're going to need everything that we got and probably more. I think if the data centers hadn't come on to the scene here, maybe that'd be a little bit different story. But you know, if you look at, you know, when I first started in this business, I think we were consuming maybe 18 or so TCF a year in the United States of natural gas. It's well over 30 TCF now, and that was back from maybe the late 1980s until now, and it's over 30. That primarily has grown because of the replacement of natural gas in the coal-fired generation area. But in my opinion, you still need coal. And the last thing I'd say about this is the industry can solve its problems. All we want is a chance, you know. So as a spokesman for fossil fuels, which I'm proud to be one of those, just give us a chance. Don't pick winners and losers, and I think natural gas will be a big part of that.
Do either of you have more to add, or should we switch over to?
Yeah, I think you summarized it well. Diversification of our resources is going to be key, and I absolutely believe natural gas will be a piece of that.
Yeah. So both MDU and Basin, you have coal-fired units.
Yep.
And I want to talk just a bit about the NERC warnings that we talked about, and how do you, as a company, both of you, Basin and MDU, look at those and respond to those? And how do you think others, how do you hear others in your industry? Because I know, Nicole, you're involved in EEI, and Todd, you're involved in your national organization. Mm-hmm. How are your colleagues responding to those warnings? And I specifically call out coal because obviously, you know, if your units are being threatened, that's going to exacerbate that problem.
So from Basin's point of view, one of our taglines is that we have an all of the above energy strategy. And unfortunately, because of what the EPA is doing, we also have to have an all of the above legal and regulatory strategy, which what the EPA came out with the other week. We are going to be defending ourselves against that and trying to keep our coal fleet in service for decades to come. And the reason for that is just think about it in the context of, and this is an oversimplification, but of batteries with respect to reliability. And I think, and I hope Nicole agrees with me, that the best battery that you can have is a reservoir of water sitting behind a dam, because you let gravity do its thing and it runs through a turbine, fewer moving parts, and it produces electricity. I think in our business, the second best battery you can have and neither one of us has one of these type of batteries, but is a freshly refueled nuclear unit, because it'll run for 18 months as long as it has water to produce steam. I'd say in our business, the third best battery you can have is a coal plant with a full coal stockpile. So that'll run between 30 and 45 days with a full coal stockpile. You don't have to worry about the trains coming and getting refueled. And actually, Basin strategy historically has been to do mine mouth. So we don't have hardly any rail transportation involved. If so, it's a very short run. And then, sorry to put you fourth, but the fourth best battery is natural gas, although as Pierce was saying, it runs through a complex web of compression and pipelines. And then somewhere beyond that is renewables and batteries. And I am optimistic with respect to technology and batteries specifically, but it's going to take time and it's going to take investment. And North Dakota is different. What happened in Texas with Winter Storm Uri was horrible. Hold the mirror up to the electric utility industry. We killed 250 people in Texas during that storm. But it was 40 degrees a couple days later. You have that happen in North Dakota, it can be 0 to 10 degrees for another week or month. And the damage is going to be much more severe. So we are all in on reliability, affordability, and being environmentally responsible as we produce electrons.
Yeah, and maybe just a quick summary on MDU. Today, just rough numbers. We are about a third coal, a third gas, and a third wind in terms of our representation of the megawatts I shared earlier on the screen. And when we think about gas, when I say it absolutely has a future, right now, our gas representation, that third, is really meant to be a peaker or a backstop to our wind from a capacity standpoint. And so I continue to believe you have to have this diversification of resources to support, and then to your point, the benefits that coal has historically provided is, again, if it's a mine mouth unit, which, you've got fuel stock right there. You're not worried about, deliverability. And I think that is one thing that, also as an industry, we need to continue to be thinking about is the coordination between electric and gas on a go forward is going to be really critical. We used to not rely as much on the electric side of our business on whether gas could be delivered, but on the coldest day, when gas is trying to, deliver to heat homes and also is being called on to run generating facilities, are we prepared and ready for our ability to coordinate between the electric and gas sector on a go forward basis? And again, I'm not just talking about necessarily MDU, I'm talking about our broader footprint from a MISO perspective. There's going to have to continue to be coordination as we think about the prevalence of gas-fired electric generation in the winter heating season.
So Julie, if you don't mind, I got to put another plug in for natural gas here. Share a few statistics with you. When you look at the forms of energy, which is the supply of energy that's going into the United States demand grid, or just the demand pool, 30% of all electric generation is supplied by natural gas. Mm-hmm. And when you look at residential, commercial, and industrial loads, which is primarily served either off major pipelines or, which is really what Nicole's business does, which is WBI and the distribution in the cities, it's almost 40% in each of those categories and that's what I would call market share. So of the total demand for residential, for commercial, and industrial users, almost 40% in all categories is supplied by natural gas. When you compare that to, say, coal, about 90% of all coal is used for one thing, and that's electric generation. And then oil, 80% of that, a little bit more than 80%, is actually used for transportation. Natural gas is about 4% of that. But when you look at the diversification, Natural gas, as it applies to an energy source, is the Swiss Army knife answer. And a lot of the things that we talk about with nuclear and coal are more level load, more base load. Natural gas can actually have base load now that we have shale plays and plenty of natural gas in the United States, but it also takes the swing load. And all that runs off, as Nicole will know, 65 degrees. Further away you get north of that, it's a cooling degree day. The further away south you get, it's called a heating degree day. And that swing can be enormous, and that's where the storage fields is our answer to batteries, and that's 4.7 TCF in the United States.
So you can see here when Nicole and Todd are talking about the use of their coal facilities and natural gas, but they've got a lot of coal in there, or some coal in their fleets, and providing power. And then when Pierce talks about the use of natural gas for power generation and home heating, and then you look at the EPA rules that are aggressively attacking both coal and natural gas, seeking to shut down the use of it and drive the cost of it, of producing it, making it available, significantly higher. You can quickly see how we're just on a path to, what was it Jamie Dimon said, a path to hell in this country without the use of fossil fuels. And so what is your industry's response to, how do you make decisions when you're investing in resources that are 30 years of capital commitments and depreciation? How do you do that in this environment when you've got regulations coming after you that are pushing you in a different direction? How does your industry responding to this and making the wise decisions to provide the power that we all depend on for our livelihoods?
You want to start?
Okay. Oh, I get to start. All right. So a couple things that I would point out, Julie, as you asked that question is, as I was showing on our map, I do want to point out we're 8 states on the gas side of our business, and we do have a couple states, Washington and Oregon, that are also challenging the direct use of natural gas. So when we talk about, Julie, you're talking about the EPA challenging the use of gas as, from a gas-fired generation perspective. There are also states across the country that are challenging the direct use of natural gas. So your question is, what are we doing to be at the table on these things? And we are challenging some of those things, right? We have to be at the table. We are with other utilities challenging the rulemaking. We're getting out to make sure that our customers, which ultimately, again, our voters, understand and what is happening in terms of these various conversations. So we have to be at the table, continuing to discuss these. How do we make decisions on investment? So in light of some of the headwinds that we may see, whether that's EPA or a state challenging, we have to also, though, continue to provide, back to my point, safe, reliable service, affordable service. So if I've got a pipeline that needs to be replaced in one of those states, and I believe it's an at-risk, I've got to replace that. I have to make that investment decision, even though I may have a headwind in terms of that state challenging, whether or not direct use of natural gas is going to be here for the long term. I also think that fundamentally we have to ask ourselves as we make those decisions that at some point reality does kick in here. And just what you're describing, Julie, is we can talk about the legislation, whether it's what EPA is suggesting or whether it's direct use of natural gas. The reality says, you just said it, Pierce, we are heating homes with natural gas. And do we think we can electrify, as an example, the entire Pacific Northwest without gas? I do not believe that's realistically possible. When we think about the EPA, we do not have that technology available today to actually be able to comply with rules in the timeline that they're suggesting. So we have to get at the table and talk about pace. Maybe we can get to these conversations, but the pace right now is not going to work. And so, again, being at the table in these various conversations, But just wanted to point out the conversation is also broader as we think about our entire footprint.
Well, kind of going back to the comments I made at the start, talk about being blessed to be in North Dakota. Basin, over its long history, not quite 100 years, but more than 60, has chosen a path of innovation and over-regulation. And it's helped some, but we still ultimately become susceptible to those regulations. So we can proudly say that we have been sequestering CO2 at one of our subsidiaries since the start of this century. And we're over 40 million tons of CO2 since the turn of the century. My colleague Dan Gallagher is down here, and he has been the brains behind us sequestering, not for enhanced oil recovery that we're sending up to Canada, the 2 million tons a year, but actually here in North Dakota, we are sequestering about 1 million tons of CO2 in the first year. We started on February 9th of this year, and we hope that we'll be able to expand that out to our power facilities, but it's going to be incredibly costly. We think one of our coal facilities, it's going to cost probably north of $2 billion to sequester the CO2 from one of those facilities, and we've got 4 coal facilities, so you can do the math. Our balance sheet's about $8.5 billion right now, so you're talking doubling our balance sheet just to sequester CO2 from our coal facilities. Now, we like reliability, we like affordability. It does come to the point of, does doing that capital investment require so much cost that you're going to do something on the generation side, whether you do more wind and then backstop it with simple cycle combustion turbines. Those are decisions to be made in the future. We had a discussion with our customers over the last year, and we said, look, you're growing in a robust manner. There is an enormous amount of regulatory uncertainty coming from the EPA, which culminated 2 weeks ago. Do you want us to continue building, or do you want us to put things on pause, we can stop growing, and wait till we have regulatory certainty? And they said to us unanimously, keep growing. You've got a plan for the future, and I'll make a little bit of news today here. Basin is in the process of siting a 1,400 megawatt natural gas plant in the state of North Dakota. It will be our largest wholly owned facility. It'll be the largest capital expenditure project that Basin has ever done, and it will be the largest generating unit in the state. It'll be just above Rainbow's Coal Creek. And
Where is it?
Well, that depends. I'm glad Nicole is up here today. It'll be north of the lake, depending on the pipeline negotiations, or south of the lake, depending on the pipeline negotiations. So anyway, it's a very exciting time for Basin, and if we have to do something sequestration-wise, we are in the best state to do that. So again, it's a blessing to do business here in North Dakota.
So we stand ready to support you all both with our natural gas.
Yeah.
So appreciate
And it will
that.
be 7% of the gas.
Do we drop the mic right here?
That's perfect. Yeah. So I guess the way I'd answer that question, Julie, is that we don't have certainty. So you're going to have to make decisions in business when you really don't know exactly what that regulatory landscape is. But I think you're making your bet on 3 things. The first is physics, because it's hard to argue that fossil fuels are the densest energy source around outside of nuclear. I'll give them that. And it's also transferable, so you can move it around. The second thing is economics. I'll give you an example of this. Nicole mentioned that this gas can either be consumed in an electric generation facility, of which you lose a significant amount of that energy in the conversion of the natural gas to an electron and then the transmission of that to the house. You can take it directly to the house and get there at 90% efficiency. And I'll give you some stats from Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, the electric cost down there for a residential customer ranges between 10 cents a kilowatt hour and maybe 12 cents a kilowatt hour. If you do the same conversion on the gas cost, this is all in, this is the cost of gas and the cost to deliver the gas to the burner tip in a home in Oklahoma, it ranges from 3.1 cents to 3.7 cents a kilowatt hour. There is nothing that competes with that. So when you hear what happens in Berkeley, California, what was that, 4 or 5 years ago, where they wanted to ban natural gas on all new construction, that kind of woke up the natural gas industry and especially the American Gas Association. And where it flies in the face is that you're taking the choice away from the consumer of what kind of energy source you want to run the appliances in your house. And so all across the United States, I think now it's what, in 22 states?
I think it's a little higher than that.
Maybe higher than that.
Yep.
My data's a little dated.
We
But
recently just got some, so last
Okay.
legislative session.
So what it is that legislation at the state level stepped in and said that we call it choice legislation, which means that the consumer in these cities should have the right to say, I want all electric or I want electric and gas. And so that's really important, we think, as the fabric of this country is choice. And so I think that's another point that I'd make. And then the last thing is innovation. And because North Dakota is the greatest example of this. When I started working up in this area back in 1998, there were 2 drilling rigs running in the entire state, and they were drilling for vertical wells. Then all of a sudden you had shale plays, you had horizontal drilling. It used to be a mile-long lateral, then it went to 2. There's some 3 out there, and even some talk about 4-mile laterals now. So the innovation that this industry has shown is second to none. I just mentioned the fact about CO2 sequestration. That's innovation. So I think what we have on our side is we got physics on our side, we got economics on our side, and we got innovation on our side.
Awesome. Again, the optimism. I love it. So how about finance, the financial community? Do you have those guys on your side right now? The ESG was causing a lot of problems for our utilities, I know, in the not that distant past, but I've heard some that maybe Wall Street is wised up a little bit and seeing some of the things like the NERC warnings. But talk a little bit about the financial community and where they're coming in on investing in the fossil resources.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I just got back from a conference yesterday in Boston, which was the city's conference up there. We go to numerous of these conferences that different banks sponsor, and we get a chance to talk to basically shareholders that own us currently and shareholders that look to be a participation in our stock in the future, bondholders, and I can tell you the mood in the room is considerably different than it was 3 years ago. And I think it's primarily because when Russia invaded Ukraine, then all of a sudden national security and energy security became a major, point of discussion. So what we are hearing, from either the bondholders or the investors that you sell equity to, is that they want to invest in companies that they feel like have a meaningful chance to actually be a good investment. And so far, I think if you look back at the energy sector this year, it's kind of proven out to be that way because we've had quite a bit of appreciation in our stock price as opposed to some of the other categories on Wall Street.
Yeah, and I would generally agree with that. I think the conversation has shifted. Wasn't that long ago where we had a couple, not that we had any problem placing our debt, we were oversubscribed, but we had a couple that chose not to participate because we had over 30% of our generation fleet in coal, and that was really their reason. reflecting on that today, that conversation has shifted some to Pierce's point as we meet with investors, not only both debt and equity investors. Not many questions around what we're doing in some of these categories. Now, saying that, we do have specific investors that have a more laser-focused attention on this, but I would agree, I do believe the conversation has shifted some.
And ESG, to some people, stands for environmental, social, and governance. I think it stands for energy stops growing. And as Pierce said, that's just the statistics that he was referencing earlier. When you want high GDP per capita, that comes along with high energy consumption per capita as well. And we had, similar to what Nicole said, 2 years ago, really when the world had woken back up from COVID, we needed to raise some money. We were trying to do a bond offering. It was in April of 2022, and we could not get it done. It failed. And I think there were a couple reasons. The Fed was getting serious about interest rate increases, and but then the investors looked at us, and I think they were looking for a reason not to invest because of what was going on with interest rates, and they circled up around ESG concerns. This year, in the first quarter of this year, we did a $370 million bond offering. So I think the investors are coming to their senses. And I was at a conference last week, and one of the presenters had an interesting statistic where Standard & Poor's actually will go in and track the usage of ESG during company conference calls. And it's been going down at a 45-degree angle over the last 2 or 3 years. So I think the world has come back to some sanity on the issue, and but it's a balance. And we all, our carbon intensity of our portfolio has increased or has decreased by over 30% since 2005. So we have a good story to tell there.
So I have one other stat on this. This recent, ONEOK recently purchased a refined products and a crude business called Magellan. It was an $18 billion acquisition, and we had to place $5 billion in debt, and it was materially oversubscribed. And this is a company that moves jet fuel, diesel fuel, and gasoline, all supposed to be replaced in the near future. I mean, near future with electric vehicles. The market didn't believe it.
Well, that's encouraging. So I want to give you a fair warning. I'm going to wrap up. We're not there yet, but we're going to wrap up with a question about what do you feel hopeful about, and what do you want this audience to do to help with the issues we've been talking about. And that's not on the list, so that's why I'm giving you fair warnings to think about it.
Okay.
But before we get to that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the states. You all, have to meet the EPA and the federal requirements, but states have very different policy goals of their own, and you all operate in multiple states, so you're obligated to meet a lot of those goals. And they may or may not be as advanced in their thought process on fossil fuels and their realization of the physics that you talk about. So talk through how you navigate the various state requirements when you have kind of systems that traverse multiple states, and how that affects sort of how the state policies affect your operations and your investments.
Well, I guess, for ONEOK, we actually do operate because we physically have assets in 22 states. You saw our map earlier. It's primarily in the middle part of the United States. I think the first thing is that you don't go into a regulator or anybody that you're trying to educate on the topic with, we're here to tell you what you need to know. You go in with the mindset of, I want to listen to where they think the issues are And then it's about asking the right questions. It's about leading the education through a question asking process, not necessarily here's our PowerPoint of why you're wrong. You've got to come at it, you know, as we said before, don't pick sides, pick issues. And understanding that other person's issue is very, very important, I think, to having some level of influence on them. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is that you just got to have an open mind, and you got to have dialogue, and you got to have communication and collaboration.
Yeah, I would say within our company, we have pretty diverse state policies as it relates to the gas side of our business. Within our electric business, we really operate, North Dakota is our largest state on the electric side of the business. And when we look at all 4 of our states, we do not have, you know, renewable portfolio standards, as I know folks are probably familiar with across the country. So we are really looking at doing what's right by balancing those decisions. So back to your point, we have lowered our overall emission profile, but we've made decisions as it relates to our facilities on an affordability basis, what's in the best interest of our customers. We haven't had to make those decisions based on a state policy or something other driving those decisions. On the gas side of the business, you know, kind of a different story. I talked about our Washington and Oregon operations. We are, to Pierce's point, at the table with our regulator. You really have to feel like you have to be part of the conversation, or pretty soon you're not going to be invited to the table. We continue to work with them, but they have pretty aggressive compliance obligations, and we are going to comply. We're going to do our part to lower our emission reductions, and we have to comply with their rules, but we're going to do it in the best way possible for our customers. So I guess the best way to answer this, Julie, is we really do look at it state by state. We don't let, you know, one state's policies bleed into the others. We're able to actually isolate a state and since we're regulated state by state, ask for rates as it relates to those particular customers in that state versus having to worry about one state affecting another.
How about you, Todd? You operate in Colorado, right?
Sure. If you look at our service territory map, what we call the wings of our service territory, and they kind of look like wings, are Minnesota and Montana. And we do own assets in Montana, but those 2 states are difficult with respect to building carbon assets. So our strategy is not to build carbon assets in there. One of the great things, and I was somewhat critical of regional transmission organizations earlier, but I think in this regard, it does help electric utilities move electrons around more freely, as opposed to me having to go to Nicole and negotiate with her to move Basin's electrons across her transmission system. So RTOs do help with that, and we can operate carbon assets outside a state without being regulated, having those assets regulated by the states, because we can move the electrons around through RTOs. So that's Minnesota and Montana. Colorado, one of the great things about the cooperative system, one of our members actually serves Colorado and New Mexico. So the arrangement we have with them is really just a purchase power agreement. So our Western assets will sell them a certain amount of fixed megawatts of energy every year, and then it's their responsibility to deal with Colorado and New Mexico. And another, just a blessing of history, is that in the early 70s, Basin built its generation fleet in North Dakota. We had a multi-state service territory, so we also had to build out an enormous transmission system. And we've done that, and that allows us to move electrons around the Great Plains very efficiently.
Good. Just to add on to what both of you said, as it relates to the Otter Tail Power and Xcel Energy, which are also regulated utilities in North Dakota, they operate in Minnesota. Minnesota has some pretty substantial mandates for solar power, and those companies have come to North Dakota saying, here's this new solar resource. And because of our legislature in North Dakota, they still really drive our resource decisions based on cost and need. So those are our criteria, cost and need, not any environmental qualities. We could say no to those facilities because they weren't needed and they weren't low cost. And so what happens then is North Dakota says, no, you can't charge our customers for that. So the entire cost of the resource goes to the other customers, either Minnesota and South Dakota or just Minnesota, which I personally feel is appropriate. And I tell that to my commissioner friends in Minnesota, saying, it's your mandate, you guys want it, you should feel comfortable paying for it. And I think the same holds true. That's the way you can deal with these policies, even on the RTO level. If a state has aggressive policy goals, then they should pay for the transmission needed to achieve those policy goals. And everybody else shouldn't be bearing the brunt of those costs. So, but that's not a done deal. That's very much an active battle. Okay, so let's go. I see Brady behind the screen over here, but we have 14 minutes left. Brady, do we not?
Oh,
Certainly do, Julie. So if you'd like to wrap it up, you certainly can.
Yeah, we're going to right now. Yeah. The last question is, what are you hopeful for? And do you have any sort of a charge that you'd like to leave the audience with in terms of getting active at any level, even if it's just a grassroots level with their own legislators, et cetera, on these issues?
Would you guys go first and I'll...
Okay, so there was two questions there, Julie. What am I optimistic about? Yep. And what would I say to the audience? So what I'm optimistic about is kind of what I teed up with, and that is industry usually finds a way. I mean, if we can work together as an industry and all in this together, we will figure out a way through these challenging times. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to have ups and downs and there won't be some challenges, but I think our industry collaborates very well together, and so I believe in this industry we will get this figured out, but it will also probably come with some challenges. What I would leave this audience with is we know energy costs matter to this group, and so be present, be educated on the topic, and help us help you.
I am optimistic about human progress and rationality. One of the charts that I had, again, fourth smallest state by population in the country, has, on a percentage basis, the most rapid growth in electricity usage over the past decade, probably going to be repeated over the next decade. Who would have thunk it? It's a great story. I think on the supply side, where we're being constrained by the EPA, I do think that we're going to be successful as an industry like we were a decade ago with the first version of the Clean Power Plan, and that rational minds will prevail. Unfortunately, we're probably going to have to do it through the courts.
Hard way, yeah.
On the supply side, on the demand side, with the technology industry and the utility industry being on a collision course, and this is really human progress. I think the technology on a lot of the AI chips and the chips that they install in these data warehouses, I think the energy consumption of those are going to come down, and we're going to work through it as two industries because we've got to partner with each other. Like Nicole said, on the costs are going to be pressured. The existing cost of Basin's generation fleet is about $850 a megawatt. The gas plant that we are getting ready to build that will consume probably about 7% of the Bakken's natural gas, that's going to cost about $2,000 a kilowatt installed. So there's going to be rate pressure as a result of that. But at the turn of the century, Basin had a balance sheet that was $2 billion. It's over $8.5 billion right now. Our costs have increased through that, but as the miracle of the development that's occurred here in North Dakota and across the Great Plains, you have had our standards of living have risen as well. So human progress.
So I've got several comments to make on this. One is that I have hope that some of the additional load that's going to come about from the AI generative load is actually going to bring in more revenue for Basin and for any of these electric generators that will more than offset what the cost is. So I guess the number one thing is I believe in the regulatory model. Second thing is I believe ultimately when the chips are down in the United States, leaders rise to the occasion. A good example of this is don't overlook the fact that North Dakota has a chairman of NARUC. That is a very influential role in this nation, and Julia, congratulate you on having that role and the job that you're doing in that role as well. And then the last thing I would say is there's three main sources of energy that we rely on. The first is fossil fuels, the second is renewables, and the third is nuclear. And every one of us acknowledge what our weakness is. In fossil fuels, it's emissions. It's not affordability, it's not reliability, it's emissions. In renewables, it's not the affordability, you know, it is the reliability piece of that. And in nuclear, it's the affordability, you know, because it costs so much to put in nuclear. And there is also that issue of acceptability of where you site, you know, these nuclear plants. But the reason the United States has survived to this point is because all three of those work together to solve the other one's problems. And that's what makes it work. So I also believe that at the end of the day, that the consumer is also a voter, and the voter is going to be practical in the way that he looks at affordability, reliability, and emissions.
Excellent. Way to wrap it up. Okay, well, I hope that you all appreciate the thoughtfulness, the intelligence, and the leadership that these three are providing in their various industries and companies, and what an asset they are for North Dakota and for being invested in North Dakota. And please join me in thanking them for sharing their time with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to you.
Well, thank you so much, Julie, and to the rest of our panel. How about another rich round of applause for the leaders on this stage right now? All right, wrapping up. Don't forget, if you want to meet Julie this evening, 5:30 to 7 o'clock p.m. at the Broadway Grill. The North Dakota Oil Pack social is also beginning at 7 o'clock p.m. tonight at the Bismarck Hotel and Convention Center. And finally, this concludes our work here today. The social with food is available in the exhibit hall. Tomorrow's great speakers will begin in this room at 8:15 a.m. and will be done by noon. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.